The Galactic Scientific Council had a simple rule: never approach a Deathworld apex predator without proper containment protocols. Commander Ryker watched through the observation deck as 3 Valkyrian researchers in full combat exosuits attempted to sedate a wounded Thanrax, a creature that stood 12 feet tall with obsidian scales, razor-tipped claws, and a jaw powerful enough to crush starship hull plating. It wasn't going well. The creature thrashed against the energy nets, its roars reverberating through the station's reinforced walls. Yellow biohazard warnings flashed across every display. The Valkyrians, despite their advanced technology and decades of xenobiology experience, were failing spectacularly. Recommendation: terminate the specimen before containment breach, droned the station's AI. Belay that order, Ryker said, pushing away from the observation window. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the airlock. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Torres, blocked his path. "Sir, that's a Thanrax. Their homeworld has 3 times Earth's gravity and an atmosphere that would melt our lungs. They're classified as Category 9 predators. Nothing approaches them without." "I know what it is, Lieutenant." Ryker moved past him toward the containment bay. "And I know it's scared." Torres stared after him like he'd announced plans to jump into a star. The other humans on the observation deck exchanged worried glances. The assembled alien scientists, Valkyrians, Crixians, and a lone Fothari, watched with what could only be described as morbid fascination. The containment bay doors hissed open. Ryker stepped through without his exosuit, without weapons, wearing nothing but his standard uniform. The temperature inside was enough to make sweat bead immediately on his forehead. The air tasted of ozone and something wild. The Thanrax noticed him immediately. Its 4 eyes, each the size of Ryker's fist, locked onto the new threat. Blood oozed from a wound on its flank where it had crashed into the station's debris field 3 hours ago. The creature had been fleeing something, though scans hadn't determined what. "Commander, you have 30 seconds before we override your access and seal that bay," came Torres's voice through the comm. Ryker ignored him. He walked slowly toward the creature, hands visible and empty. The Thanrax growled, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. Its muscles bunched, preparing to lunge despite the energy nets. Then Ryker did something that made every xenobiologist in the observation deck question humanity's intelligence rating. He whistled, not a random sound, but a specific pattern, low and steady, with a gentle rising lilt at the end. It was the sound he'd used to calm his dog back on Earth when thunderstorms rolled across the Montana plains. It was the universal language of "I mean you no harm." The Thanrax paused. His head tilted slightly. Ryker whistled again, taking another step forward. He kept his posture relaxed, non-threatening, even though every survival instinct screamed at him to run. The creature's breathing slowed fractionally. One of its clawed hands relaxed against the deck plating. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Vekthar, the lead Valkyrian researcher. "The acoustic frequency has no correlation to Thanrax communication patterns. This shouldn't. It can't." But it was working. Ryker crouched down, making himself smaller. He continued the whistling pattern, adding small variations, what animal behaviorists called prosody. The Thanrax's 4 eyes tracked his movements, but the aggressive posture began to ease. Its tail, which had been thrashing violently, settled against the floor. "Commander, the creature's cortisol levels are dropping," reported the medical officer over the comm, voice filled with disbelief. "Aggression markers down 40%. I don't have an explanation for this." Ryker extended one hand slowly, palm up. The Thanrax leaned forward, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. For a moment, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. The creature's massive head lowered. It sniffed Ryker's hand once, twice. Then, in a gesture that would spark 3 academic conferences and rewrite xenobiology textbooks, the apex predator of Thanrax's prime, classified as too dangerous for standard contact, pressed its scarred snout against the human's palm. In the observation deck, controlled chaos erupted. The galactic scientific community descended on Research Station Kepler 442 like moths to a flame. Within 48 hours, Ryker found himself at the center of an unprecedented phenomenon that nobody could explain. The Thanrax, whom Ryker had privately started calling Titan, despite regulations against naming research subjects, refused to let anyone else near it. Valkyrian specialists with decades of experience were met with growls and defensive posturing. Kryxian animal empaths, whose species could literally sense emotional states, triggered aggressive responses. Even sedation protocols failed. Titan metabolized the drugs too quickly, awakening confused and more agitated. But when Ryker entered the containment bay, the massive predator settled immediately. This violates every principle of xenobiology, Dr. Vekthar insisted during the third emergency council meeting. His chitinous plates rattled with frustration. Deathworld apex predators don't form attachments to alien species. They certainly don't form them within 48 hours. The human isn't prey-sized for submission signaling, isn't pack-sized for social bonding, and doesn't emit any pheromones compatible with Thanrax biochemistry. And yet, Torres said from his position by the wall, arms crossed, Commander Ryker just spent 2 hours treating Titan's wounds while the creature sat there like an overgrown puppy. Puppies are Earth animals, the Kryxian representative chittered. That comparison is meaningless to this council. Actually, Ryker said quietly from his seat, it's not. He pulled up a holographic display. I've been reviewing behavioral data from Earth species. Dogs, horses, elephants, dolphins, all apex or near-apex species that formed bonds with humans despite no evolutionary pressure to do so. We called it domestication, but that's not quite right. He expanded the display to show neural scans. It's something else, something in how humans approach other species. We don't just see threats or resources. We see potential companions. The Fothari observer, a being of pure energy housed in a containment suit, flickered with interest. Elaborate, Commander. Ryker stood, pacing as he organized his thoughts. Every species here approaches xenofauna with protocols. Containment, sedation, analysis. You maintain dominance through technology. He gestured to the observation window where Titan rested, its massive form relaxed. Humans approach with curiosity. We extend trust first even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous. That's suicidal, Vekthar said flatly. Is it? Torres interjected. Humanity tamed wolves, pack hunters that saw us as competition. We befriended horses large enough to kill us with a kick. We swam with predators in Earth's oceans and rode the backs of animals that could gore us. We didn't survive despite our ability to bond with dangerous species. We survived because of it. The council chamber fell silent. On every screen, data streamed from the containment bay. Titan's stress hormones, minimal. Aggression markers, baseline. Social bonding indicators, off the charts. There's something else, Ryker continued. The whistle I used, it's not about the frequency. It's about the intent behind it. Titan doesn't understand the sound. It understands the emotion I'm projecting. Calm, safety, trust. Emotional projection isn't scientifically quantifiable. Vekthar protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? The Fothari's voice resonated through their suit. Our species exists as pure thought and energy. We perceive emotional states as clearly as you perceive light. What the human describes, we've observed it. There's a harmonic resonance in his neural patterns when he approaches the creature. An openness, an invitation to connection. Ryker nodded slowly. On Earth, we call it empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, even when that other is completely different from us. He looked at each council member in turn. You've spent centuries studying alien life as subjects. Humans spent millennia living alongside it as neighbors. The implications hung in the air like a charged particle field. Dr. Vekthar's plates rattled again, but this time with something other than frustration. If what you're suggesting is true, if humans possess some innate ability to form cross-species bonds that transcend biological compatibility. He trailed off, mandibles clicking rapidly, the Valkyrian equivalent of rapid calculation. It would revolutionize how we approach first contact. The Kryxian finished. It would change everything, the Fatherry agreed. Torres cleared his throat. With respect, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, we have one human who bonded with one creature. That's not a scientific paradigm shift. That's an anecdote. As if in response, alarms blared throughout the station. The containment bay's biometric sensors spiked red. On every screen, Titan lurched to its feet, throwing its massive head back in a roar that shook the observation deck's windows. Cortisol levels spiking, the medical officer reported. Aggression markers at 90% and rising. It's calling for me, Ryker said, already moving toward the door. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. Titan wasn't attacking. Titan was afraid. The question was, what could frighten a Deathworld apex predator? Ryker sprinted through the station's corridors, Torres close behind. The roaring hadn't stopped. If anything, it had intensified, taking on a desperate quality that made Ryker's chest tighten with borrowed fear. Commander, wait! Vekthar's voice crackled over the comm sensor readings are detecting spatial anomalies near the containment bay. Something's. The transmission cut off as reality itself seemed to bend. Ryker stumbled, catching himself against the wall as a wave of nausea swept through him. The station's lights flickered. Through the windows, space twisted in ways that hurt to look at. Warp signatures, Torres gasped. Multiple contacts. Unknown configuration. They rounded the final corner to find the containment bay's outer doors already open. Emergency protocols should have sealed them. Inside, Titan thrashed against reinforced barriers that were beginning to buckle. The creature's 4 eyes were wild with panic, fixed on something beyond the bay's exterior wall. Titan, easy, Ryker called out, but for the first time, his voice didn't calm the creature. Titan barely seemed to hear him. Then Ryker saw what had the Thanrax terrified. Through the containment bay's observation port, shapes moved in the void. They were ships, but unlike any in the Galactic Council's databases. Organic, writhing. Their hulls seemed to shift and pulse with bioluminescent patterns that made Ryker's eyes water. The collectors, Torres breathed, his face pale. Christ, the rumors were true. Ryker had heard stories. Every spacer had. The collectors were a myth, a ghost story told in deep spaceports. A species that harvested rare creatures from across the galaxy, selling them to the highest bidder or worse. Most dismissed them as legend. The station shuddered as one of the ships latched onto the hull. Metal screamed. Titan's roaring reached a fever pitch. They're not here for the station, Ryker realized. They're here for Titan. As if in confirmation, sections of the containment bay's walls began to dissolve. Not explode or burn, dissolve, eaten away by some kind of acid or nanotech. Through the widening holes, things entered. Bipedal but wrong, their proportions off, movements too fluid and too jerky at once. Titan charged the first one. Despite its injuries, the Thanrax moved with terrifying speed, claws extended. The collector creature met the charge with weapons that crackled with purple energy. The blast caught Titan mid-leap, sending the massive predator crashing into the bay's floor. No! Ryker was moving before he could think, before Torres could grab him. He hit the containment bay at a run, sliding between Titan and the advancing collectors. It was insane. He was one human, unarmed, facing creatures that had just dropped a Category 9 predator. Every tactical bone in his body screamed retreat. But Titan had trusted him, had let him approach when terrified and wounded, had chosen connection over aggression. Ryker stood his ground. The collectors paused. Their weapons, organic things that seemed grown rather than built, tracked his movement. Then one spoke, its voice a synthesized harmony of dozens of tones. Human, remove yourself. The specimen is valuable. You are not. That's where you're wrong, Ryker said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. Behind him, he heard Titan stirring, whimpering, a sound that broke his heart. This isn't a specimen. This is Titan, and you're not taking it. The collector tilted its head, the gesture alien and insectoid. Curious. You claim possessive attachment to a creature not of your world, not of your genetic lineage. Explain this illogical behavior. You want logic? Ryker spread his hands, taking a step forward. The weapons tracked him but didn't fire. Here's logic. Titan crashed here fleeing something. I'm guessing that something was you. And instead of treating its wounds, instead of helping, you want to cage it. Use it. We preserve rare species, the collector said. We prevent extinction. You collect trophies, Ryker countered. There's a difference. Behind him, Titan had risen to its feet. The creature's breathing was labored, injured, but it moved to Ryker's side. Not in front, beside. The implications made several xenobiologists in the observation deck gasp over the open comm. Pack behavior. From a solitary species. The collectors advanced. More poured through the dissolved walls. Ryker counted 8, then 12, then lost track. His hand found Titan's flank, fingers pressing against warm scales. The creature rumbled. Not a growl, but something closer to acknowledgement. Last chance, human. Move aside. Ryker smiled without humor. You know what you haven't done? You haven't asked Titan what it wants. It is incapable of. Actually, came Vecthar's voice over the station speakers. That's where you're incorrect. The Valkyrian's tone carried a vindictive satisfaction. Commander Ryker, our translation matrix has been analyzing Titan's vocalizations. They're not just roars. They're language, complex, sophisticated. On every screen in the containment bay, translated text began scrolling. Titan's roars, compiled and interpreted. The Packless one came with soft sounds. Not threat, not prey. Something new. Choose friend. Choose stay. The collectors fell silent. In the observation deck, the entire Galactic Scientific Council stared at data that rewrote their understanding of consciousness itself. Titan had chosen. A Deathworld apex predator had looked at an alien creature and decided. Friend. Well then, Ryker said softly, his hand still pressed against Titan's side. I guess the specimen doesn't want to go. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. And we're going to. The nearest collector's weapon came up. Unacceptable. Everything happened at once. The collector's weapon discharged with a sound like breaking glass and thunder. Ryker dove left, but he was too slow. He knew it with crystalline certainty. The purple energy crackled toward him, and time seemed to stretch. Then 12 feet of scaled muscle moved faster than anything that size had a right to. Titan's tail whipped around, striking the energy blast mid-flight. The beam dispersed across the Thanrax's armored scales, leaving scorch marks but nothing more. Titan positioned itself fully between Ryker and the collectors, roaring a challenge that translated across the station's speakers. Hurt the soft sound one. Face the void. Station defense systems online. Torres's voice came through the comm, tight with controlled fury. All personnel clear the containment bay. Commander, that includes. Negative, Ryker said, rising to his feet. He moved to Titan's side, one hand pressed against the creature's flank. He could feel the rapid heartbeat, the coiled tension in every muscle. Torres, don't fire yet. Sir, they're hostile. They're scared, Ryker interrupted, and suddenly he understood. He looked at the collectors, really looked, and saw past the weapons and the threats. Their movements were too coordinated, too synchronized. They're not individuals. They're a collective consciousness. And we just showed them something they've never seen before. What's that, Commander? Vecthar asked. Choice. Ryker took a step forward, Titan matching his movement perfectly. The synchronicity wasn't trained or commanded, it was organic, intuitive. The collectors raised their weapons, but hesitation rippled through their ranks. You preserve species, Ryker called out. Catalog them, study them. But you've never actually connected with one, have you? You've never asked what they want because you're incapable of understanding that they might want something. The lead collector's synthesized voice carried a note of something almost like confusion. Want, desire, these are computational errors. Survival imperatives misinterpreted as emotions, Ryker finished. Yeah, I get it. You don't feel, so you assume nothing else really does either. But here's what you missed. He gestured to Titan. This creature fled your collection fleet, crashed here wounded and alone. By your logic, it should have killed me on sight. I'm exactly the wrong size and composition to trigger any positive response. Category 9 predators don't make friends. He moved closer to the collectors, Titan's shadow falling over him protectively. But Titan didn't see a food source or a threat. It saw someone offering help. And it chose to trust that offer. Not because of pheromones or instinct, but because... Ryker paused, searching for the right words. Because trust itself has value. Connection has value. The collectors stood motionless. Through the dissolved walls, their ships pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that Ryker was beginning to recognize as communication. They were debating, calculating. This is inefficient, the lead collector finally said. The specimen has measurable value. Your emotional attachment does not. Then measure this, Torres called out. On every screen, data flooded in. Neural scans, hormone levels, behavioral analyses. In 48 hours, Titan's stress markers dropped 70%. Healing accelerated by 40%. Aggression toward station personnel, 0. That's not just attachment. That's measurable improvement in health and well-being. Vekthar's voice joined in, and Ryker could hear the excitement beneath the Valkyrian's typically measured tone. The human's approach yielded results our best xenobiologists couldn't achieve in months. No sedation, no restraints, just... The scientist paused. Just kindness. Kindness is not a recognized scientific parameter, the collector stated. Then your science is incomplete, the Fatheri observer interjected. Their energy form blazed brighter in its containment suit. I perceive the bond between the human and the Thanrax. It resonates on frequencies you cannot measure because you've never experienced them. The human offers something you collect, true preservation. Not of the body, but of the will, the choice, the self. The station shuddered as more collector ships attached themselves to the hull. Reinforcements. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Torres had defense systems ready, but they all knew how that would end. The station would be destroyed, and everyone on it killed. Unless... I have a proposal, Ryker said quickly. The collector's weapons tracked him as he moved into the center of the bay, Titan following like a shadow. You want to preserve rare species. He gestured around at the station. Want to study them, understand them. What if we combined approaches? Elaborate. Work with us. Not as collectors taking specimens, but as partners. Humans have this ability, this weird, illogical, beautiful ability, to bond with species that should terrify us. To see the individual in the specimen. Ryker's hand rested on Titan's scarred snout. Let us teach you. Let your collective consciousness expand to include something you've never had. Perspective from beings who feel what you study. The silence stretched. Ryker could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Titan's breathing synchronized to his own. In the observation deck, the Galactic Council waited. On Earth, millions of miles away, humanity went about its day unaware that one of their own was gambling everything on the galaxy's belief in connection over calculation. Finally, the collector spoke. This proposal, interests are collective, but it requires proof. Demonstration that your bonding capability extends beyond one creature. The dissolved walls suddenly expanded further. Through them, more creatures entered. Ryker's breath caught. They were specimens, dozens of them. Species he recognized from council databases and some he'd never seen. All Category 7 or higher predators. All restrained by energy fields. If the human can demonstrate bonding capability across species barriers, the collector said, we will consider collaboration. Failure will result in collection of both human and Thanrax. Torres's protest crackled over the comm, but Ryker held up a hand. He looked at the assembled creatures. Terrified, aggressive, wounded. Each one taken from their home, caged, catalogued. Each one deserving a choice. Ryker took a breath, looked at Titan one more time, and walked toward the nearest cage. Let's rewrite some science, he said softly, and began to whistle. The first creature was a void serpent from the Arcturus sector, 40 feet of crystalline scales and bioluminescent fury, capable of surviving in hard vacuum. Its energy cage barely contained its thrashing coils. Every xenobiology text classified it as non-contactable. Too aggressive, too alien, too other. Ryker approached slowly, hands visible. The serpent struck at the energy barrier, and the impact sent electromagnetic feedback crackling across the bay. Behind him, Titan rumbled. Not threatening, but encouraging. The sound made Ryker smile despite everything. He began whistling, that same low pattern he'd used with Titan, but this time he varied it. Higher notes, flowing like water. The serpent had no ears as humans understood them, but it had sensory organs that detected vibrations across multiple spectrums. More importantly, it could sense intent. The creature slowed. Its crystalline scales shifted from angry red to uncertain yellow. Ryker crouched at the barrier's edge and placed his palm against the energy field. The feedback stung, but he held steady. "I know you're scared," he said softly. "I know this isn't home, but I see you. Not a specimen. Not a category. You." The serpent's massive head, all angles and alien geometry, tilted. The scales shifted again. Blue now, the color of calm deep space. Slowly, carefully, it brought its snout to the barrier opposite Ryker's hand. In the observation deck, controlled chaos erupted. Data streams went critical. Every scientist talked over each other. Ryker moved to the next cage. Took 3 hours. 3 hours of approaching creatures that could kill him in seconds. A magma tyrant whose body temperature melted deck plating. A phase shifter that existed partially in another dimension. A storm caller whose neural discharges could stop a heart. Each one aggressive, terrified, alone. Each one responded. Not all the same way. Some took longer. The phase shifter required Ryker to sit motionless for 40 minutes before it manifested fully. The stormcaller only settled when Ryker started humming, actual humming, with melody and variation that seemed to match the creature's own electromagnetic patterns. But all of them, every single one, made the same choice Titan had. Connection over isolation. Trust over fear. By the time Ryker approached the final cage, he was exhausted. His voice was hoarse from whistling and humming. His hands trembled from adrenaline crash. But he kept going because 23 creatures were watching now, all calm, all waiting to see what happened next. The last cage held something he didn't recognize. Small, barely the size of a house cat, with 6 legs and opalescent fur that shifted colors. His cage data listed it as a dreamweaver from a planet in the Orpheus cluster. Capable of inducing hallucinations, memory manipulation, nightmare projection. Category 10. The highest threat classification. Ryker, don't, Torres warned. That thing can rewrite your mind. Make you forget who you are. But Ryker saw past the classification to the creature itself. It wasn't aggressive. It was curled in the smallest possible ball, making itself tiny, invisible. The universal language of something that had learned the world was cruel. He opened the cage. Every alarm in the station went off. The collector's weapons came up. In the observation deck, Vecthar made a sound like a chitinous groan. But Ryker just sat down cross-legged in front of the open cage and waited. The Dreamweaver didn't move. Minutes passed. Ryker's exhaustion caught up with him, and his eyes started to close. He jerked awake, fighting to stay conscious, but his body had other ideas. He dreamed. In the dream, he was everywhere and nowhere. He experienced the Dreamweaver's terror as it was ripped from its home. Felt the collector's cold efficiency, the cage's confinement. The loneliness of being surrounded by others of its kind but unable to connect, all of them isolated in their individual prisons. Then the dream shifted. Warmth, a soft sound, whistling. Hands that offered help instead of harm. For the first time in the Dreamweaver's short life, a choice. Ryker woke to find the small creature curled against his chest, purring like one of Earth's cats. Its opalescent fur had settled on a gentle gold. Around him, 23 other creatures watched with what could only be called approval. The lead collector stood motionless for a long moment. Then, proof accepted. The human has demonstrated capability beyond our collective's projections. The bond extends not to one creature but to all contacted specimens. Measurable improvements in stress markers, aggression indicators, and healing rates confirm efficiency of approach. It's not about efficiency, Ryker said, still sitting on the floor with the Dreamweaver in his arms. It's about seeing other beings, really seeing them, and choosing to care about what happens to them. A distinction we are beginning to understand. The collector's synthesized voice held something that might have been wonder. Our collective wishes to propose collaboration. We possess specimens. You possess connection. Together we could free them, Ryker interrupted. First, before anything else, these creatures didn't choose to be here. Let them choose now. The collectors conferred in their silent, collective way. Then, one by one, the energy cages deactivated. What happened next would be debated in xenobiology circles for decades. Every creature, given the choice to flee, stayed. Not in the bay. Most moved to other parts of the station that better suited their environmental needs. But they stayed. Near Ryker. Near each other. A collection that had become, impossibly, a community. Titan pressed against Ryker's side. Rumbling contentment. The void serpent coiled near the observation windows, its scales displaying patterns that translated as safe place. The storm caller generated a gentle field that powered the station's systems, reducing reactor load by 30%. Commander, Vekthar said, entering the bay for the first time since the crisis began. You've invalidated approximately 400 years of xenobiological research. Sorry about that, Ryker said, not sounding sorry at all. Don't be. The Valkyrian's plates rippled in what Ryker had learned was laughter. You've also opened doors we didn't know existed. The collectors have agreed to work with the Council. They're sharing their databases, their preservation techniques. And in return, we teach them about empathy, Ryker finished. He looked around at the impossible gathering of species. About choosing connection. The galaxy has a word for what you've done, the Fatheri said, their energy form pulsing with colors that indicated joy. It's an old word. From Earth. Ambassador. Ryker shook his head. I'm not an ambassador. I'm just a guy who whistled at a scared animal and got lucky. Torres laughed from the doorway. Sir, you bonded with 24 Category 9 and 10 predators in 3 hours. That's not luck. That's humanity. In the days that followed, the story spread through the galactic network at faster-than-light speeds. Humanity's strange ability to form bonds with deadly creatures became the subject of scientific inquiry, diplomatic interest, and no small amount of awe. The collectors became the Council's partners in a new initiative, ethical specimen preservation that prioritized the creature's well-being and choice. Humans served as liaisons, using their peculiar gift for empathy to bridge gaps between species that had never communicated before. And in the center of it all, on Research Station Kepler 442, Commander Ryker sat in a bay filled with creatures that should have killed him. Titan's massive head rested in his lap. The Dreamweaver dozed on his shoulder. Around him, a community that shouldn't exist thrived on nothing more than trust and kindness. You know what the really crazy thing is? Torres said, sitting beside him. What's that? On Earth, we've been doing this for thousands of years, making friends with wolves and horses and birds. We just never thought to call it a superpower. Ryker smiled, scratching behind Titan's jaw ridge. The Thanrax rumbled contentment, and a dozen other creatures echoed the sound. Maybe, Ryker said softly, the real superpower is seeing past the teeth and claws to the person underneath, and choosing to say hello anyway. In the observation deck, the Galactic Scientific Council began rewriting their textbooks. Above them, stars wheeled through the void, and everywhere humanity went, they brought the strangest weapon ever deployed in the galaxy's history. A whistle, a kind word, and the radical belief that connection was always possible. Even with monsters, especially with monsters, the galaxy would never be the same.